Today we're talking about a subject in databases that makes a lot of people feel like they want to give up, or at least one that certainly made me feel that way. Can you guess what it is? We're talking about dirty data. Now this video is part of my video series that I'm making on SQL, teaching you the best practices and the language all the way from the ground up. And we're talking about dirty data pretty early on in this series. And frankly, that's because in real life, you're not going to get to work with beautiful, clean data sets. You're rather going to have to deal with ones that are incomplete and are frankly difficult to work with. Now, talking about the different ways to handle bad data could be a year-long course. But today we're going to be focusing on blank values in your database, or as they're also called, null values, and how you can find them, as well as replace them with correct values. So we're going to jump into my laptop in a second, but first, I just wanted to say that while this video will stand on its own, if you're interested in following along with me, you can click the playlist down below to watch all of the previous videos in this series. That way you can get your computer set up exactly like mine, as well as start to join us for these lessons where I'm teaching you how to learn SQL completely for free. Now, if you like video content like this, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It helps keep the channel growing and helps keep me motivated to make videos. With that said, let's jump into the computer, log into our SQL server, and get today's lesson started. Like with most of these videos, we're going to start by opening up SSMS, and then once it loads, we're going to log into our local host SQL server that we have on our video. So here we are, localhost / SQL Express. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hit connect. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit a new query, and we're going to go and we're going to take a look at our SQL practice database, which you should have on your computer if you've been following along in this video series. If you don't have it, don't worry, you can just watch, or you can go watch the earlier videos in the series linked down in the video playlist down below and configure your personal computer the same way. But here we are in our server. Now, this data that I gave you to load is perfect data. There's no values that are bad. There's no dirty data. There's no nulls. There's no nothing. So we're going to have to create some bad data for the purposes of this lesson. And we're going to do that using a method that we talked about earlier in the video, which is how you can insert values into a SQL table using the insert statement. So we are going to go ahead and we're going to write a new insert statement to actually put some bad data into our customers table. So I'm going to go insert into SQL practice. So our database name, our schema name of .dpo, then our table name of customers. And we'll go customer ID, first name, last name, email, phone. And then we'll go into values, and we have essentially, I believe, 10,000 customers in here. So we don't want to try to insert a primary key that already exists. So we'll go 1001, and then we'll insert in a value of null, which is our blank value, null. And then our email will be test@icloud.com. And then our phone number will be 000-000-000. And we'll go ahead and we will, I said values, so we'll go values right there. And we'll go ahead and we'll run this SQL code. And just like that, we can see that we now have one value inserted. So what is a null value? You just saw me type it and you just saw the database accept it, but we haven't actually talked about what it is. So a null value in a database is basically signifying the absence of a value. It's indicating that a piece of data is missing or unknown, and it's very different from a zero or an empty string. You can kind of think about a zero because a zero is still a number, an empty string is still text with no character, but a null is the absence of value. We literally have no idea what it means. So we have no idea what their first name is. Now, when you're creating a table, you can create essentially null constraints on the table. So you can say, hey, this can't be null. So if we look over here, right, our primary key cannot be null. But that's not true for most columns on default when you create a table. So right here, for example, all of these columns can contain null values. And dealing with null values in a database can be really difficult. So first, we're going to write a where criteria that allows us to find null values. So we're going to go select star from, and we'll go SQL practice .dbo.customers, and we'll go where first name is null. Now this is a logical operator. We're saying, hey, this value is null. When we run this, it should return any values where the first name is null. And look right here. There it did. Now we can also use the opposite. So we can all use the not modifier. So we can go select star from SQL practice.dbo.customers where first name is not null. And when we run that, it should return all the rows where the first name is not null. Now you might be like, great. Well, you've shown me how to find nulls or how to not find them. How can I go about fixing them? And that's where SQL functions come in. In particular, two SQL functions. Now, we haven't talked about what a SQL function is, but it's essentially a predefined piece of code that performs an operation and returns a value. You can kind of think of it like a mini program that when you give it an input, returns an output in a database. So the two types of SQL functions that I want to talk about today are meant specifically for handling null values. So the first one in SQL Server is ISNULL, or if you're in another different type of SQL Server other than Microsoft's, it's probably NVL. But they operate the same way. Essentially, they take an input, and if that input is null, it then returns the second value in the expression. So the way this would work in SQL Server is I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to take our query from earlier where we're identifying customers with a null first name, and I'm going to go is null, and my input is going to be first name, and if it is null, I want it to return Bob, right? And if I run this, what'll happen is right here, I'll get a column named Bob. Now I can also have it return a secondary column instead. So I could say instead return last name. And if I run this right here, you'll see it will instead return last name. But I can't then put in a third expression, right, of Bob. It'll throw an error. So that is where our second expression comes in, which is COALESCE. So COALESCE basically functions the same way, but when it essentially, you can chain columns together and it'll keep on going until it finds the first one that's not null. So for example, if I go first name, then last name, then Bob, right? It will keep on going through until it hits a value that's not null. So for example, here, right, with is null, I couldn't put a Bob after, but with COALESCE, I could, and it just actually was able to take that third expression. So with that said, it's now time for our practice problems. And in order for us to have some practice problems, we need to create some more dirty data. So let's go ahead and let's go up here to our insert statement. And we're going to insert in a few more rows using our insert statement. So I'm going to go here. We're going to change this to 1002. We're then going to change this to 1003. We're going to make our first name be Bob here. And then here our last name will be find me. So I'm going to have this SQL script on my GitHub, which will be linked down in the video description. So if you want to find all of these examples, you can, as well as go get this insert statement. That way you don't need to rewrite it. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to run this. And now we're going to have some dirty data in our database for us to work on our practice problems. So it is now time for our practice problems. Just a gentle reminder, if you want to attempt our practice problems, you need to set up your personal computer like mine. So go watch the Learn SQL for Free video playlist down in the video description and get your computer set up the way mine is. But with that said, problem number 1 is going to be find any customer in the customer table with the last name of find me and a null first name. So pause the video right now and attempt that problem. So here we are. Here is the answer to problem 1. First, we're going to select star because no column was specified in the problem. And then we're going to go from our SQL practice.dbo customers, and we're going to say where last name equals find me and first name is null. And when we run that, we should get our 1 row returned just like that. All right, now it is time for problem number 2. So the problem number 2 will be is find any customer with a null first name and replace it with the value of UKN for unknown. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can figure it out. Okay, so here we are. We're going to be using the ISNULL function because if it's null, we just want to immediately replace it with a value. So we only need 1 value. And if you're in a different server, again, this would be NVL. So like an Oracle server would take NVL. But we're going to say ISNULL first name return unknown. And we're going to say where first name is null. So when we run this query, what you'll see is that we get 2 unknowns returned for our 2 rows where the first name is null. So if you made it this far, congratulations, you've made it to the end of the lesson. If you're not subscribed and you like this video content, please consider subscribing. And thank you for joining me here today. I hope you learned something.